All right, what's up, children's? Old man shouting at clouds again. Back after vacation, picking up kind of where we left off. The last two videos were basically an overview of the Harris Walls platform and the Trump Vance platforms. They got a decent amount of engagement as my videos go. And Sam, you even commented on one and said you found it valuable. So I appreciate that feedback. I'm glad it was in some way useful. And we're going to kind of continue on that vein, but I do want to note that I'm not going to be spending a ton of time discussing politics on a continuing basis. I think there's a lot of other lessons I'd rather be teaching you, a lot of other lessons I'm probably better positioned to teach you, because I'm certainly not an expert on this stuff. But there are some things I want to talk about, and given the presidential election looming large, I feel like the timing is as good as any to cover them now. So, where we're going to pick up from last time is last time I did a high-level overview of just the websites. I hope you'll notice a continuing trend here of I'm trying to take the emotion out of these issues and just evaluate them as rationally and cool-headedly as I possibly can. So, what I'm going to build on from last time is again that kind of idea of just, evaluating platforms, but this time we're going to take it at a real high level. So, Democrat versus Republican. What kind of differentiates them, and where do we typically find that one side performs better than the other side? Spoiler alert, both sides have strengths and weaknesses, okay? So it's not as though one party is better than the other. It's just trade-offs, okay? There are some areas where Republicans tend to get better outcomes. There are some areas where Democrats tend to get better outcomes. You have to understand that and then make the decisions that best align with your personal values, okay? And one thing I really want you to take away from this video, if you didn't take it away from the last two, is people who see these things differently are not monsters, okay? The people who don't see things the same way as you aren't evil. They don't hate America. They just see this differently than you. They just might value different things more than you do, and certain things less than you do, okay? Doesn't make them wrong. So one thing I found in doing this research is that there's states and localities that do very well under Democratic leadership and those areas that do very well under Republican leadership. One is not wrong and the other right. It's just trade-offs, okay? So I hope you understand that before we dive in. So, at any rate, so we're going to go in alphabetical order, okay? Just that's how we're doing it today. So I'm going to start out by evaluating areas where Democrats typically get better results, and then we'll dive into areas where Republicans typically get better results, and then we'll kind of wrap it all up. So, diving in, where do we see that blue states typically outperform red states? So things like public education, access to quality healthcare, infrastructure, GDP per capita, workforce development, and social safety nets. Those are areas where we typically find that Democrat-run states get better results. So what do we mean when we say better results? Well, so for public education, what you might expect to find is that there's more investment per pupil in blue states. And what that typically leads to is, yes, they'll do better on standardized test scores in general, and they will have higher graduation rates. So states that commonly lead the way, Massachusetts, New Jersey, they do tend to be blue states. Okay? So, and kind of along the same vein, we do see that workforce training and development is typically prioritized in blue states. And, you may see this in areas particularly where tech has a big presence. They typically require employees who have a higher degree of training. So that's not terribly shocking, but hopefully you also noticed in what I just said what the trade-off is, okay? There's more investment per pupil. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means it costs more. We're spending more money per student to get these outcomes. So You do get some better results, but you're also spending more money to get them. So that's a trade-off there. Along the same lines, healthcare accessibility and quality, okay? Well, we know healthcare is expensive in the US. We also have some really good technology. Well, to bring that quality of care and technology to the greatest number of people is going to be expensive. This is something that we typically see borne out in blue states. They provide healthcare to a wider range of people, and that healthcare tends to be better in quality. All right. Next up, talking about infrastructure. So this one you do have to dive into a little bit more deeply. To say that blue states typically invest more in infrastructure seems to be accurate. But you also have to understand somewhat why that almost needs to be the case. So if you look at states that historically have gone blue, it's not terribly shocking to find New York on that list, Illinois, California. What are some things we notice about those states? Well, they have some really major metropolitan areas, right? New York, you have New York City, the biggest state in or the biggest city by population in our country. California, we have San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Silicon Valley, like big metro areas, San Francisco, San Jose, that have a ton of population in a relatively condensed area. Okay, so naturally, when you have big cities, you're going to need more infrastructure. Okay, you're going to need more robust sewage systems. Certainly, you're going to need a lot of highways and roads, schools. You're going to need more schools because you have a larger population. So, but we do notice that the Democrats tend to spend more money in that. You are typically going to find better public transit systems in blue states, and that one I will put a little bit of an asterisk on that because I don't think there's really hardly any places in the United States that truly do public transit well. I've been to Europe, I've been to South America. It's significantly better in both of those places. We have historically focused more on roads, and so whatever you think of that, at least the Democrat side would be more likely to invest in public transit. The red side is going to be less likely to invest in it. GDP per capita, that could almost be like an entire video of its own, but just suffice it to say, blue states typically have a higher GDP per capita. Now, again, is some of that impacted by the fact that they have major metro areas? Probably, yeah. There's a lot more jobs in big cities, so naturally you would find the GDP is going to be higher there. And then workforce development, I already talked about, and then social safety nets. These would be things like Medicaid, which is essentially health care for people that can't afford it. You'll find more robust, like food stamp programs, social welfare, basically the safety net. That is something that Democrats definitely focus on more than Republicans. Whether you agree or disagree, or you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it does seem to follow that pattern. So, on the flip side, what are things that Republican administrations typically do better than Democrats? Well, one thing, and you may have guessed this already, but business friendly. They do tend to be known for that because they're typically going to charge lower tax rates to corporations, and they're going to typically work to reduce regulations, and that can lower costs for businesses. So it's not terribly shocking when we see big corporations relocating to places like Texas, Alabama, where the taxes are lower and the regulations are less onerous. Now, there are regulations that exist for a reason, right? So things like preventing a company from dumping toxic waste into lakes and streams, for example. You may agree that that regulation needs to be there, but it's not a hallmark of Republican administrations. Or at a very minimum, what they're going to tell you is that they're going to try to cut some like regulations that maybe don't make the most sense. Now, maybe that's a great idea, but we do need to be careful there. But at any rate, that's what they're known for. Being tougher on crime, that does seem to be a trend, and those areas may end up being safer as a result. Finally, lower costs and lower taxes. So it's not just the taxes that typically end up being less onerous. The cost of living in red states can often be lower. So things like purchasing a house, for example, and there again, that may be a direct result of removing some forms of regulation. So I know that sometimes zoning laws can really get in the way of trying to increase the supply of housing, for example. Well, if you have a reduced supply, what do we know happens to price? It goes up, right? Especially if we're holding demand constant. So that is something that red states do seem to have an advantage in, is that the zoning restrictions maybe aren't quite as intense, so they can increase the supply and bring the cost down. So there are perfectly valid reasons for a person to support either party. I think pretty much anybody at this point could get on board with having a lower cost of home ownership. That has gotten pretty out of control in our country pretty fast, and we definitely have a supply issue. So maybe there's an argument to be made that some zoning restrictions do need to be lifted. And certainly, I think most people enjoy paying less money in taxes than they do paying more, although there again, there's a trade-off. You're going to get less in exchange. If you're not spending money, you can't expect the public programs to be in existence. And similarly, if you want those public programs in place, you need to understand that that's going to hit you in the tax bill. So hopefully what I've illustrated here, and listen, I went into this at a incredibly high level, okay? There's a lot more information you could dive into. Each one of these topics could almost be its own video. That's not what I'm here for. You can probably find that information at the library or in other YouTube videos. But what I'm trying to illustrate is that there are valid arguments for voting for either party. And there are states that are successfully run by Democrats, and there are states that are successfully run by Republicans. So it's not like one is correct, the other is incorrect. It just depends on what your values are, okay? If you're a more independent-minded person and you don't really want the government playing a huge role in your life, then maybe a red state is a better fit for you. Maybe Republican policies are a better fit for your values. By the same token, if you're more of a, collectivist person mentally, and you want to make sure that opportunities exist for everyone, then maybe the Democratic policies are the best fit for you and your values. But that doesn't make either person wrong or right, and it doesn't make either one good or bad. It's just it's just a case of having trade-offs, right? Like if you're going to expect larger social services and larger government programs, you need to understand that the taxes are going to come along with that. And if you don't want those taxes, you got to understand you're not going to get the same level of infrastructure. So I hope this has helped a little bit with that. Again, if you watch the political ads, you would think the world's coming to an end, and if one party gets in power, it's all over and we're doomed. And hopefully what this video has illustrated is that tends to not be the case, okay? You tend to be able to have a perfectly good quality of life in many blue states and a perfectly good quality of life in many red states. So we really need to start having better conversations. And I think if I do one more video on this topic, what it's going to be is what I think we should be focusing on as candidates right now. If I were running for president, what would my campaign platform be? And then hopefully by the time I put a bow on all of this, what I really want you guys to take away from it is we've just got to have way better conversations, way less emotional conversations. We've got to make it harder for our politicians to manipulate us, and we need to treat our opponents with a lot more respect and dignity. Okay? So anyway, not to lecture, but I hope you also find this video valuable. I love you very much. Talk to you next time.